Snow fell in slow spirals as the mountains held their breath. On the northern ridge, a young wildlife researcher crouched beside a half-frozen creek, adjusting a trail camera that had blinked out during last night's storm. Before we begin, a quick question for you, watching. If you were the only person who knew the last black wolf in these mountains was still alive, would you protect it, even if your town called it a monster? Stay with us to the end, subscribe if stories of true wilderness move you, and consider supporting the sanctuaries that keep this wild heartbeat alive. The camera chimed to life. The lens caught a figure slipping between cedar shadows, tall, lean, a shadow inside the snow. Not gray, not tawny black, the color of midnight pooled around firelight. It paused at the creek where ice stitched the edges like white thread. For one long second, the wolf lifted its head and stared past the camera as if it could see through glass and wire to the hand that had placed them. Then, it moved again, soundless as snowfall. She had heard rumors. In the diner by the highway, men with sunburned necks and elk stickers on their coolers called it a devil. At the feed store, someone passed around a blurry photo like a curse. The county message boards said the wolf was bad luck, a harbinger of cattle gone missing. But a biologist sees patterns where superstition sees shadows. Melanism in wolves is rare, but not impossible here. A single survivor could remain. A lineage could flicker like an ember hiding under ash, waiting for one clean breath to glow again. She rewound the memory card, scrubbing back to the first frame. The eyes, pale reflective, were not cruel. They were cautious, calculating. Alive. She marked coordinates in her fieldbook elevation trail aspect weather notes. The creek's temperature hovered just above freezing. Tracks would hold in the silted bank. She stepped softly, heel to toe measuring stride, documenting pad impressions. The wolf avoided the snare line that someone had set farther downstream, the wire loop disguised beneath wind-blown willow leaves. That meant it was smart. That meant someone else was here too. A pickup engine rolled somewhere beyond the trees. Voices carried laughter too loud for this quiet place, the clink of chain. She slid behind a deadfall breath, shallow heart, drumming a fast staccato beat. She had filed her research permits. She had coordinates she never posted publicly. She had training that said to remain an observer. But some lines blur when a life steps across them. On the snow, the wolf's track cut toward the snare line. The voices moved closer. Between her palm and the cold ground, she felt the land's pulse, ancient, steady, indifferent to human fear. She could choose to leave. She could choose to watch. Or she could step into the story and change it. When the voices faded, she moved. One clean motion cut the wire flag the site for the Warden record. Everything, no grandstanding, no heroics. A raven lifted from a birch and traced a black arc in the pale sky. Somewhere on the far slope, a single low howl unspooled, long and resonant, threading the valley from one ridge to the next. What happened next would make everyone rethink what they believed about monsters, about miracles, about what a human owes to a wild living thing. What happened next shocked everyone. Her name was Emily Carter, 27 years old, a graduate student turned field researcher. To her colleagues back at the university, she was the quiet one, the kind who preferred data sheets to debates, trail boots to lecture halls. But out here in the jagged spines of the Montana backcountry, she felt more herself than anywhere else. Emily was raised in a small town where the grocery store doubled as the post office, and everyone knew the sound of everyone else's truck. Her father worked as a mechanic, her mother as a librarian. While other kids traced football scores, Emily traced paw prints in the dust of the county road. From the beginning, she loved patterns. She kept notebooks filled with sketches of bird wings, migration maps. She copied from textbooks lines of poetry tucked between equations. The wolves fascinated her most. Her earliest memory of them was hearing a pack howl on a family camping trip in Yellowstone. She was 7, lying awake in a canvas tent, her mother's hand on her shoulder, whispering, "That's the sound of the wild still breathing." It never left her. The mountains where she now worked were raw, carved by glaciers, chiseled by wind. Ridges serrated the horizon, and valleys filled with fog like spilled milk at dawn. Winter was long here. Snow swallowed fences, silenced logging roads, and pressed cabins under weight heavy enough to bend roofs. In spring, the melt released torrents that scoured creek beds down to bone-white stone. By summer, wildflowers burned across meadows, lupine paintbrush. Fireweed before autumn came with its copper winds. For wolves, this country was both cradle and crucible. Elk herds moved through like tides. Deer browsed in willow bottoms. Coyotes threaded laughter across the ridgelines, and ravens wheeled overhead, always watching. For generations, black wolves had roamed these mountains, but their numbers dwindled with every decade. Hunting habitat loss and fear sharpened into near extinction. Local folklore had turned the last of them into shadows. Ghosts whispered to scare children indoors. When a hunter claimed to glimpse eyes lit like coals near the timberline, the story grew into a curse. By the time Emily set foot in the valley, the black wolf had become more myth than mammal. Her research grant was modest motion sensor cameras, a GPS tracker, weatherproof notebooks, and a battered pickup with 180,000 miles. But for her, it was enough. Every week, she hiked grid lines across the range, documenting ungulate movement, predator-prey dynamics, scat analysis, and soil samples. Her work was science, but beneath it ran something harder to quantify: a longing. She wasn't just counting wolves. She was searching for the ember her mother spoke of, the sound of the wild still breathing. The cabin she stayed in was a leftover from an old logging lease, one room aloft, an iron-bellied stove that smoked if you fed it green wood. The creek cut close to the property, and in October, moose came to test the shallows. By November, elk moved through in a tide of antlers and steaming breath. At night, coyotes laced the dark with laughter, and once in spring, a mountain lion left parenthetical tracks by her porch. The human world felt far away. Aid checks arrived once a month. Groceries came from town in cardboard boxes that froze solid in her truck bed. The sheriff's slow drive-by after storms was the closest thing to a safety net. It was in this isolation that the black wolf first crossed into her story. One morning, reviewing footage from a trail camera set along the northern ridge, she saw it sleek, tall, the color of midnight. Its movements were liquid, purposeful. It paused, head raised, nostrils flaring, as if sensing the lens. In that instant, she knew this wasn't rumor or legend. It was flesh and breath. Why did their paths cross? Perhaps by chance. Perhaps because the wolf's territory overlapped with the grid of her study. But Emily believed it was more. She believed the land had placed her here at this time with enough patience and persistence to witness what few others could. She had no illusions. Wolves owed humans nothing. But the moment she saw those pale eyes reflecting starlight, she felt a responsibility settle into her chest. Not ownership, not conquest, responsibility. The locals remained suspicious. At the diner, hunters leaned over coffee cups trading theories. It'll take calves soon. You'll see. Ranchers at the feed store muttered about setting more traps. Online forums called it a devil. Emily said nothing. Instead, she returned to her cabin, packed her rucksack, and hiked back into the timberline with fresh batteries and sharper resolve. Every trail told a story: claw marks on aspen bark hair, snagged on barbed wire, the geometry of prints in mud. She read the forest like scripture, each sign another verse in the larger hymn. And always, somewhere beyond sight, she felt the presence of the black wolf moving, watching, surviving. This was the stage a young researcher shaped by memory and driven by science alone, in a land carved by ice and haunted by folklore. One searching for truth, the other for survival. Two trajectories drawing closer with every day until the inevitable moment when their eyes would meet, not through a lens, but across open ground. What happened on that day would change both of them forever. It happened in late February when the snow was still knee-deep and the wind sang through bare aspens like a warning. Emily had been running her transect line since dawn, following the faint arc of paw prints etched across a frozen draw. At first, she assumed they belonged to a coyote, but the stride was too long, the impressions too deep. Her breath quickened not from the climb, but from recognition because these were wolf tracks fresh enough that wind hadn't filled them. She moved cautiously, documenting every step, camera at the ready. The valley narrowed between two ridges, funneling her toward a stand of evergreens. As she approached, the silence thickened. No ravens, no wind, just stillness, as if the land itself held its breath. Then, from between the trees, it emerged. A shadow at first dissolving from black bark. The wolf stepped forward, fur darker than the surrounding trunks, eyes pale against the dim light. Emily froze. For a heartbeat, predator and human regarded one another across 30 yards of snow. She had seen wolves in Yellowstone, tracked them in telemetry studies, but never like this. Never alone, never uncollared, never wild in the purest sense. Fear struck first. Every instinct screamed at her to back away. Her fingers tightened around her trekking pole, though she knew it was no weapon. The wolf's chest expanded, breath steaming into the cold. Its ears flicked forward, then back, assessing. For a moment, it seemed like the stories were true, that she stood before a monster born of shadow and curse. But then came something unexpected. The wolf lowered its head slightly, not in threat, but in acknowledgement, as if measuring her not as prey, but as presence. Its tail hung relaxed, not stiff with aggression. Emily felt the fear drain, replaced by awe. What she saw was not a beast. It was survival embodied, scarred, cautious, magnificent. She lifted her camera slowly. The shutter clicked once, loud in the quiet. The wolf's ears twitched, but it didn't flee. Instead, it circled toward the stand of evergreens. That was when Emily noticed the glint of metal half buried under snow, a snare set cruelly at the base of a game trail. Her pulse surged. The wolf was moving straight toward it. Without thinking, she dropped the camera into the snow and stepped forward. "Hey!" Her voice cracked against the cold. The wolf stopped, eyes narrowing. She waved her arms, crunching through snow toward the trap. Her boot struck the wire first. She crouched, pulled at the frozen loop, breaking it free before the animal could step closer. The wolf tilted its head. A low rumble rose from its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a warning, something in between. Emily's heart pounded, but she didn't retreat. She coiled the broken snare into her pack, lifted her hands in a slow gesture of peace. For several long seconds, they stared at each other across the trampled snow, two creatures caught between instinct and choice. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the wolf turned. With a bound, it vanished into the timberline, leaving only paw prints pressed deep into the snow. Emily remained, knees shaking, breath fogging the air. She felt as though she had crossed an invisible line, no longer just an observer, but a participant in the black wolf's survival. Back at the cabin that night, she replayed the scene in her head, every detail sharper than the photographs she had managed to take. The wolf's eyes, the sound of its breath, the weight of its presence. Fear had been the doorway, but compassion had followed. She could have turned back, let the trap claim its victim. Instead, she had acted. And in that action, something shifted, not just for the wolf, but for her. Over the next days, Emily found herself scanning every ridgeline, every stretch of snow for signs of black fur. Once she discovered a half-eaten elk carcass, ravens lifting in a black cloud as she approached. Paw prints circled the site. The wolf was alive. More than that, it was thriving clever enough to avoid hunters strong enough to claim a kill. Yet danger remained. Rumors spread in town that more snares had been set. A hunter boasted of tracking the devil wolf to its range. Emily knew her decision at the snare was only the beginning. Still in the quiet hours, she remembered the moment their eyes locked. It was not hatred she saw there, nor hunger. It was recognition. A bridge between two worlds that were never meant to meet. And though the wolf had vanished into the trees, its howl carried across the valley, nights later low and resonant, threading through the cabin walls until her chest vibrated with its echo. She whispered into the dark, though no one could hear, "I'll protect you." That vow would bind her fate to the black wolves in ways she could not yet imagine. After that first encounter, Emily could no longer return to the safety of detachment. Every track in the snow felt like a message, every distant howl like a reminder of the vow she had whispered. Her research notes shifted subtly from raw data points to quiet chronicles of survival. She was still a scientist, but now her heart had joined the work. The first challenge came with hunger. Late winter gnawed at every creature in the valley. Elk moved south, deer browsed scarce willow shoots, and even ravens grew bold scavenging near cabins. Emily found evidence of the wolf's struggle in the half-buried remains of snowshoe hares, thin and meager. One morning, she discovered a set of tracks circling her cabin, not threatening, but searching. The black wolf had passed close, perhaps lured by the faint scent of soup from her stove. She tightened food storage, reminding herself of the line she could not cross: never feed, never tame. Yet her chest ached, knowing the wolf endured hunger alone. She recorded the signs, filed them under foraging behavior, but privately, she wrote a single line in her journal: "Strength is measured in what you endure unseen." A week later, storm clouds rolled down from the peaks. Snow fell in relentless sheets, piling waist-high within days. Emily's cabin groaned under the weight smoke from the stove pressed flat against the roof. She ventured out to check her cameras, each step through drifts a battle. Near the ridge, she found what she dreaded: blood on snow, scattered fur. A wolf's paw print dragged uneven. Panic flared. She followed the trail until the storm veiled it completely. That night, wind howled like voices. Emily lay awake, fearing the black wolf had met its end. But just before dawn, a sound cut through the gale, a low, wavering howl, ragged but alive. Relief flooded her hot against the cold. She whispered thanks to no one in particular, as though the mountains themselves had heard. By March, the thaw began. Ice-fractured creeks swelled, and the valley pulsed with water. Emily hiked daily, documenting signs of survival. The wolf had healed, its tracks lengthened, its stride steadied. Once she glimpsed it at a distance, limping slightly, but carrying a hare in its jaws. Another time, she found fresh scat beside one of her cameras, evidence that it still prowled its territory. Each sign was a reassurance the wolf endured. But endurance came with new trials. Local ranchers grew restless. Calves were due in spring, and talk spread of a bounty. Emily overheard heated conversations at the feed store. "That devil wolf won't last the season." She said nothing, but inside her determination hardened. Her role was still observer, but she felt compelled to act within the boundaries of law. She sent anonymous reports to wildlife authorities, urging them to patrol, documenting snare sites, marking GPS coordinates of suspicious tracks. It was dangerous walking the thin line between researcher and protector. One April morning, she stumbled upon a crisis. A river swollen with melt had swept debris into a narrow gorge. Along the edge, she spotted the black wolf. Its foreleg was wedged between rocks, pinned by a fallen branch. The animal thrashed, teeth snapping at water spray. For a heartbeat, Emily froze. Training told her to stay back. Instinct told her to move. She scrambled down the embankment, heart pounding. The wolf's eyes blazed with terror. "Easy," she whispered, though the words meant nothing to it. With a broken branch, she levered the trunk aside. The wolf yanked free, stumbling onto the bank. For one suspended second, predator and human stood a breath apart. Water streamed from its coat, its sides heaving. Emily braced, expecting teeth. Instead, the wolf staggered past her, vanishing into brush. She slumped to her knees, trembling. Later, she replayed the scene endlessly. By stepping in, had she saved the wolf? Or had she only endangered herself? The safety guidelines she lived by rang in her ears. Yet, she couldn't regret it. In its eyes, for just a moment, she had glimpsed something beyond fear, something like recognition. Through spring, the bond deepened, though no hand ever touched fur, no leash ever bound wildness. It was built instead of moments, the wolf howling within earshot of her cabin, her returning calls softly echoing a note higher. The wolf leaving scat near her trail cameras, almost as if marking their shared ground. Once she found a half-buried deer hide near her cabin's edge, a remnant of a kill. Gift or warning, she couldn't say what. She logged it as evidence of prey availability, while privately sensing it was something more. There were setbacks. In May, the wolf vanished for nearly 2 weeks. Emily feared the worst. She hiked farther, scanned ridges, found nothing but silence. When it returned, leaner scarred across its shoulder, relief and sorrow tangled in her chest. Something out there had tested it, another predator perhaps, or hunters. Survival had a cost. By early summer, her research took on urgency. Every interaction carried weight. The wolf was growing bolder, straying closer to ranchland. Ranchers grew angrier, voices sharper. Wildlife officers sent warnings. Research permits came with boundaries. Do not interfere. Do not intervene. But Emily's nights were haunted by the image of the wolf's eyes, by the knowledge that snares and rifles lurked beyond ridgelines. She faced her own tests too. Food dwindled between grant disbursements. Isolation pressed like a heavy coat. Yet the black wolf's howl threading through the dark kept her steady. It was as though they carried each other across seasons, two survivors bound by circumstance, not choice. The climax of that summer came one evening at dusk. Emily returned from checking cameras to find the wolf standing across the creek framed by willows. It didn't flee. It didn't threaten. It simply stood watching, pale eyes steady. For minutes, they remained in silent accord, two beings sharing the same space without fear. Then, with a low rumble, the wolf lifted its head and howled a long, resonant call that rolled through the valley. Emily's chest ached with the sound. She whispered the only reply she could. "I hear you." From that night, she no longer thought of herself as a researcher alone. She was witness. She was custodian. She carried the story of the last black wolf, and in carrying it, she knew she would face greater storms ahead. Summer waned into autumn. The meadows that once flared with wildflowers now browned beneath crisp winds. Emily knew the rhythm well, animals preparing, tightening hoarding against the long winter. But change came not only with the season. Danger thickened as palpable as storm clouds on the horizon. Ranchers pressed the state for action. "A black wolf prowls near our calves," one letter to the county office declared. "If the government won't deal with it, we will." Emily read the bulletin with her stomach clenched. She knew the wolf had wandered farther, testing boundaries, perhaps driven by hunger or instinct. And she knew human tolerance was thinner than ice in spring. Then, in early October, a wildfire sparked. Lightning split the sky, igniting tinder-dry slopes miles away. Winds carried flame faster than crews could contain. Emily's cabin filled with the acrid sting of smoke. From her ridge, she saw entire valleys swallowed in orange. The mountains groaned under the weight of fire. She evacuated her research files to her truck, ready to leave. But in the chaos, she thought of the wolf. Its territory lay directly in the fire's path. Her chest tightened. She had promised herself she would not interfere beyond law, but this was different. This was survival against nature itself. With mask and headlamp, Emily hiked toward the northern ridge. The air shimmered with heat. Ash fell like gray snow. Branches snapped underfoot as she pushed deeper. Through smoke, she caught sight of movement, the black wolf limping, herding desperately toward the creek. Behind it, the slope flared with fire trees collapsing in a chorus of sparks. Emily froze. It wasn't alone. Two smaller shapes clung to its flanks' pups. Her breath caught. The rumors of extinction were wrong. This wolf had not been the last. It had carried a lineage hidden from all eyes until now. The creek they sought was blocked by a wall of flame. Firestorm winds funneled heat into a barrier of living hell. The wolf paced snarling pups, whining trapped. Emily's heart hammered. She had no water, no gear. But she had a choice. She grabbed a heavy branch, swung it against burning brush, and carved a desperate path. Sparks seared her sleeves. Heat blistered her face. This way, she shouted through the words meant nothing to wolves. Still, they felt her movement, her urgency. The wolf lunged, pups scrambling after. Together, they plunged through the narrow corridor Emily had carved, flames closing in behind. They reached the river's edge just as fire crowned the ridge. The water roared, swollen with ash. Across lay safety. The wolf plunged first current, dragging its fur. Emily followed, half swimming, half stumbling. She felt the river tear at her, cold against burning skin. The pups paddled beside, carried by instinct. On the far bank, she collapsed to her knees. Smoke clawed her lungs. The wolf stood, dripping sides, heaving, pups pressed to its legs. For one timeless moment, they shared the same breath. No fear, no divide, just survivors of the same inferno. Then the hunters arrived. 3 men, rifles slung, faces streaked with soot. They had followed the fire line, searching not for safety, but for quarry. The black wolf growled, low, ears flat. Emily rose, arms wide. "Don't shoot," she screamed, voice breaking. "There are pups. This isn't what you think." The hunters hesitated, eyes narrowing through smoke. One raised his rifle. Emily stepped forward, placing herself between muzzle and wolf. Her legs shook, but her voice steadied. "If you kill it now, you kill more than a wolf. You kill the last of something irreplaceable." The standoff stretched, heat and silence and breath. Then in a blur, the wolf moved not toward the men, but toward Emily. It shoved her aside with its shoulder, just as the shot rang. The bullet grazed fur, missing her chest by inches. The wolf lunged not to attack, but to shield. Chaos erupted. The fire surged closer, sparks raining. Hunters cursed, retreating under the weight of smoke. Emily coughed, vision swimming. The wolf, bleeding from a graze, stood tall, defiant, pups cowering beneath. For a heartbeat, its pale eyes locked with hers, steady, fearless, final. Then it howled. Not a call of fear nor pain, but a defiant anthem that shook the valley. Even the fire seemed to pause, listening. The pups echoed in high-pitched cries, a fragile chorus rising. Emily felt tears burn hotter than the smoke. She knew what that howl meant, a declaration, a passing, a promise. The hunters fled, flames roared. The wolf staggered but kept upright, pushing its pups toward Emily. She ushered them down the slope, away from fire, away from gunfire. When she looked back, the black wolf remained on the ridge, silhouetted in firelight, its howl carrying until it dissolved into smoke. By dawn, the fire had passed. Ash blanketed the land like a shroud. Emily searched the ridge for hours, calling silently in her heart. But the wolf was gone. Only paw prints remained leading into scorched timber, fading into nothing. She carried the pups to safety, trembling with grief and awe. The last black wolf had not been last after all. Its legacy had survived written in fur and bone and breath. And in that wildfire night, it had chosen to protect not only its blood, but her. Emily drove back with the pups secured in crates, contacting wildlife officers despite fear of reprisal. Regulations demanded the pups be transferred to rehabilitation centers, but she knew their survival was a living testament proof against folklore and fear. The howl still echoed in her ears long after a sound that was not an ending, but a bridge into the future. The fire left scars across the mountains, black ridges carved into memory. Emily returned with the wolf pups secured in crates, exhausted skin, blistered lungs raw from smoke. At the sanctuary gate, she pressed the buzzer with shaking hands. Officials met her with shock and suspicion. "Where did you find them?" A ranger asked, eyes narrowed. Emily hesitated. The truth that she had pulled them from the fire beside the black wolf felt too fragile, too sacred to expose. But she also knew that hiding the truth would risk their survival. So, she told the story piece by piece. The ranger listened, jaw tight, clipboard shaking slightly as he wrote. Within days, news spread. Rare black wolf pups discovered in Montana wildfire. Headlines ran across local papers, then national outlets. What should have been a triumph for conservation quickly twisted into conflict. Ranchers claimed the pups would grow into cattle killers. Hunters demanded they be euthanized. Even some officials questioned Emily's role. "You crossed the line," one supervisor said in a tense meeting. "You're a researcher, not a rescuer. Protocol forbids interference." Emily clenched her fists beneath the table. "Would you have left them to burn?" she asked. Silence followed heavy as ash. Her grant came under review. Forums online accused her of fabricating the encounter, staging footage for attention. Anonymous messages slid into her inbox. "Those wolves don't belong here, neither do you." Fear seeped into her nights, a different kind of fire, one lit by human anger. The sanctuary staff did their best. They fed the pups, monitored their health, documented every sign of survival. Emily visited daily, standing outside the chain-link enclosure, listening to their high-pitched yips. They were not tame, still wild in their eyes, still carrying the legacy of their parent. Yet her presence calmed them. One pup, smaller than the rest, always turned its gaze toward her, as if remembering the night by the river. But as the weeks passed, opposition sharpened. Ranchers gathered at county meetings, waving petitions. "If these wolves are released, they'll cost us our herds." Hunters filled forums with threats. Politicians weighed in balancing conservation laws against rural votes. What began as a fire rescue had become a battleground. Emily testified before the state board. She wore the same field jacket, still faintly smoke-stained. She spoke not with anger, but with conviction. "These pups are proof that the black wolf's line endures. Proof that what we fear may also be what saves balance in our ecosystem. They are not devils. They are part of this land." The room split. Applause from conservationists, jeers from ranchers. One man shouted, "When they come for my calves, I'll remember your name." Afterward, officials pulled her aside. "You need to step back," one warned. "Your involvement is inflaming tensions." But Emily couldn't step back. She visited the pups anyway, documented their growth, their howls growing deeper, more resonant. Each day they resembled their parent more. Each day she feared the decision looming: sanctuary or release. The law was clear. Wolves born in the wild, even rescued, should be reintroduced when strong enough. Yet the political climate was volatile. Releasing black-coated wolves into ranching country would spark outrage. Some whispered of transferring them to captivity indefinitely. The thought hollowed Emily. To cage wildness was to kill it in slow motion. Conflict grew sharper one November evening when she returned to her cabin to find bullet holes in the siding. A note nailed to her door read, "Stay out of it, or else." She called authorities, filed reports, but protection was thin in remote country. Fear gnawed at her, but so did resolve. If anything, the threats hardened her. She remembered the wolf's final howl carrying strength through smoke. She would not let that legacy be silenced by fear. The pups became symbols far larger than themselves, hope for some, threat for others. Documentaries sought access. Politicians drafted speeches. The sanctuary set stricter rules on who could visit. Through chain link, Emily pressed her palm to the cold air, whispering promises only the pups could hear. But the decision could not be delayed forever. Winter pressed close. The pups grew restless, their energy surging against fences. They paced, leapt, tested the limits of captivity. One day, the smallest pup let out a howl, not high-pitched like before, but deep, eerily similar to the call of its parent. Sanctuary staff turned to Emily with uneasy eyes. "They won't stay tame," one said quietly. "They're meant for the wild." She nodded, throat tight. She knew what came next, a choice: to fight for their reintroduction despite risk, or to accept captivity for the sake of safety. Either path carried weight. Either path would fracture hearts. The conflict was no longer just about wolves. It was about fear-power coexistence. Emily stood in the storm's eye, carrying both the science of her work and the memory of the wolf that had saved her life. And she knew the hardest part was yet to come. Winter settled hard over the valley. Snow pressed the sanctuary fences into gleaming lines, and the black wolf pups, now nearly grown, paced with restless energy. Their coats had deepened to midnight, each step echoing the legacy of the parent that had given everything for them. Emily stood outside the enclosure, breath clouding in the air, knowing time was running short. The Board of Wildlife officials had reached a decision: the pups would be released. It was the only path consistent with law, with biology, with the wildness thrumming in their blood. Yet the order came wrapped in warnings. If they move toward ranchland, lethal action may be authorized, one officer said flatly. Emily's stomach turned. Release was freedom, but it was also risk. Her colleagues urged caution. Some conservationists begged for relocation to a remote sanctuary away from conflict, but Emily argued otherwise. They were born here. Their blood belongs to these mountains. To exile them is to erase their story. The day came sooner than she wished. Dawn cold and silver. The sanctuary staff loaded the crates into a transport truck. Emily followed in her old pickup tires, crunching over frozen gravel. They drove to the edge of the burn scar, where green shoots had begun to pierce through ash, a place of both memory and renewal. When the crates were set down, silence held the group. Emily knelt, gloved hands resting on steel mesh. Inside, the smallest pup met her gaze, eyes pale and steady. It was the same pup that had howled first, the one that had lingered at her side whenever she visited. She swallowed hard, whispering words only it could hear. Your parent gave everything so you could stand here. Now it's your turn. The doors were opened. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the wolves stepped out, paws pressing into snow, as though claiming it for the first time. They moved hesitantly, at first muscles taut, ears twitching. Then, instinct surged. They bounded forward into the tree line, tails sweeping behind like black banners. Emily's chest ached with pride and loss. She wanted to call them back, to hold on to what she had carried through fire and fear. But wolves are not meant to be held. They are meant to vanish into trees, to carve paths unseen. The smallest pup lingered. It stood at the edge of the clearing, head turned. For a long moment, its gaze locked with hers. Then, it threw back its head and howled a clear, unwavering call that threaded through the cold air like an arrow. Emily pressed her hand to her chest, tears cutting lines down her cheeks. The pup turned and loped after its siblings, disappearing into forest shadow. Silence fell. Only Emily's heartbeat remained heavy and raw. She stayed long after the others left. Snow fell gently, softening tracks until they blurred. She walked the clearing, memorizing every paw print. Each was a testament, survival, legacy, continuation. As she traced the ridge, she imagined the parent wolf standing once more in firelight, its final howl echoing. Now the chorus had been passed to another voice. Driving back alone, the valley looked different. Not emptier, but fuller, as if stitched with invisible threads of presence. Somewhere out there, the black wolves moved together, carving a future. She would not see them again, not closely. That was the price of wildness. But she would always carry the memory of their eyes, their howls, their defiance against fire and fear. Back at her cabin, she lit the stove and opened her field journal. On the final page, she wrote, "I let them go." That was the truest act of love. She set down her pen, listening. Far in the distance, faint but real, came the answering call of wolves. Her lips curved in a broken smile. They had not vanished. They had returned to the land that had shaped them. And in their farewell, they had left her with something no fire, no hunter, no law could take away: the knowledge that the black wolf story was not ending, but beginning anew. The release stirred echoes far beyond the mountains. News stations replayed the footage of dark shapes loping into the snowbound forest, voices arguing over whether it was miracle or mistake. Conservation groups called it proof that the black wolf's bloodline endured. Ranchers called it a threat reborn. For Emily, it was something quieter, deeper, the fulfillment of a promise. She returned to her cabin with a strange stillness in her chest. The wolves were gone, yet not gone. Their tracks etched the land, their howls threaded the night. She felt them in the silence between trees, in the shifting of elk herds, in the keen attention of ravens circling above. The wilderness was not emptier for their departure. It was fuller. Weeks passed. Snow-thickened storms swept valleys, but the wolves endured. Trail cameras captured fleeting images, sleek black bodies crossing ridgelines, glowing eyes caught in infrared. Emily cataloged each frame, heart lifting with every confirmation. The wolves were not only surviving, they were thriving. Not everyone celebrated. At county meetings, tempers flared. "They'll be at our fences by spring," a rancher warned. What happens when calves go missing? Wildlife officers emphasized monitoring, compensation programs, non-lethal deterrence. Emily spoke softly when asked for comment. "Fear paints shadows larger than they are," she said. "These wolves are not curses. They are part of the system that keeps these mountains alive." The debate raged louder than before, yet something shifted. A photo circulated online, a black wolf silhouetted against sunrise. Two younger ones trailing behind. The image went viral, shared not as a threat, but as a symbol of resilience. Donations poured into sanctuaries. Young students wrote essays about wolves as guardians of balance. Even skeptics admitted grudgingly that the mountains felt more alive knowing the black wolf's kin roamed again. For Emily, the response was mixed blessing. She faced interviews, scrutiny, criticism. Some accused her of crossing lines, others called her a hero. She rejected both. "I only bore witness," she told one reporter. The wolves wrote their own story. Back at the cabin, solitude wrapped her again. She continued her work, checking cameras, logging prints, recording data. Nights grew long. Often she sat by the stove, pen in hand, replaying the wildfire night, the farewell howl, the final look of the parent wolf. Memory cut sharp, but it no longer hollowed her. It steadied her like stone beneath snow. One dawn in February, while hiking to reset a frozen camera, she heard it, a chorus of howls rising from the valley. Not one, not two, but several voices weaving together. She froze, heart hammering. Then she smiled through tears. The pups were grown now, their voices braided into the land. The lineage had not ended, it had multiplied. She knelt in the snow, eyes closed, listening. The chorus rose and fell, echoing across ridges spilling into sky. For a moment, she felt she was no longer human, separate from Wolf, but simply one voice in a larger song. Later, reviewing her field notes, she wrote, "We feared extinction." But the truth was continuity hidden until fire revealed it. Life finds a way through ash. Her journal became less about measurements and more about meaning. She still logged scat samples, track widths, GPS coordinates. But alongside data, she wrote reflections. Resilience is not absence of fear, it is persistence despite it. Wildness teaches us that. In spring, green returned to burned scars. Aspen shoots, rose elk calves wobbled on new legs, and somewhere the black wolves moved unseen. Emily saw only glimpses, an ear through brush, a paw print beside river mud. But that was enough. The wolves belonged to the land, not to her eyes. Her cabin remained simple, one room, one stove, maps pinned with notes. Yet the world felt larger. She was no longer alone in her work. She was part of a story carried on the wind, etched into soil, woven through howls at dusk. And when storms rattled windows, when hunters muttered threats, when loneliness pressed close, she remembered that final night of fire, the wolf standing tall, eyes steady, shielding her. That memory steadied her more than fear ever could. The conclusion was not neat. Some ranchers still raged. Some hunters still hunted. Wolves would always test boundaries. Humans would always debate them. But in the mountains, balance tilted quietly towards survival. One evening, as the sun fell copper over the ridges, Emily stepped outside, notebook in hand. A howl lifted across distance, answered by another, then another. She closed her eyes, breathing it in. The sound was not ominous, it was sacred. She whispered into the fading light, "You're home." In the end, the story of the Black Wolf was never just about an animal. It was about what we fear, what we protect, and what we choose to remember. For generations, people here called the Black Wolf a curse, a monster, a shadow that haunted the mountains. But when fire came, when rifles raised, it showed the truth: courage, sacrifice, and legacy. Emily learned that wildness cannot be measured only in data sheets or headlines. It lives in moments, the flash of eyes in snowlight, the echo of a howl across ridges, the hush that falls when predator and human meet without violence. She came to these mountains as a researcher. She left as a witness to resilience. The lesson was not neat nor simple. Wolves will test fences. People will argue. Coexistence is messy, fragile, demanding. But fragility is not weakness. It is the thread that binds life together, each strand dependent on another. To tear it is easy. To protect it takes courage. The Black Wolf's final act was not one of rage, but of protection, shielding the human who had dared to shield it. That choice reverberated, passed down to its pups, carried in their howls. And now, when the mountains stir with their chorus, it is no longer the sound of fear. It is the sound of survival. For us, watching the message is clear. What we fear may be what we most need. What we call monster may be treasure. And the stories we tell shape whether the wild has a place beside us or only in our memories. So let the howl remind us the earth is not ours to conquer, but to share.